this happened, and then, um, and so ironically or interestingly, turning it to fiction gave me the freedom to be a lot more honest and really true to the experience versus, the checkbox of this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And so that's sort of how that evolved.
Interesting. And Tiffany Drayton, who was publishing fantastic journalism pieces in my class for a lot of different publications. I remember starting with the Frisky. I think she wrote one piece, and the next thing I knew, she had 20 or 30 pieces going on and was publishing everywhere.
Sue, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but ever since this thing started recording, all of a sudden I'm not hearing very well. I'm not sure if I'm the only one having this problem.
Oh, should I speak louder? Can you hear me now?
That's so odd.
Yeah, I was going to mention that Tiffany, if you want, I could email.
There has to be technical difficulties or it's not Zoom,
Right. Okay, so I'm going to email you too. But so Tiffany recently published a fantastic piece called Black American Refugee in the New York Times. And through that, got a fantastic agent, actually the agent that I met Samantha through, Susan Gollum, and turned it into a Random House memoir, her debut Random House memoir, which is coming out next February. And so I want to know, how did you go from essay?
I'm really sorry, but I'm gonna have to probably restart this in 2 seconds because the audio just went out, so I'm not hearing anything. So excuse me, 2 minutes.
Okay, so she's gonna go out and come back in.
Here we are. I got it. Yay! I don't know why it paused.
Yeah, so I was asking, so you did this great, after doing a lot of journalism, you did this great piece for the New York Times that ran on the front page of the opinion section and called Black American Refugee. And you did a proposal and you sold it to Random House. And so it's your debut novel coming out in next February. And the description that from the piece, it's about how gentrification and racism kind of ruined America for you, and you moved away. So could you tell us about the process from going from the essay to the to a memoir proposal?
Well, absolutely. And I think the first thing I really want to say, just as plainly, and I want everyone to take away from this conversation, is listen to Sue. Listen to Sue. If you're in her class, she knows what she's talking about. You listen to Sue and you will make your debut, okay? Because those are facts. So pretty much, I've been trying to land a piece in the New York Times at that point for some years now. Ever since I took Sue's class, I think the first time I took it was in 2012. Or maybe 2012. So between then and last year when I sold the piece, I had been trying to land a piece in the Times and had no luck. So when I did finally get that confirmation that the piece was going to run in the Times, the first person I contacted was, of course, Susan. I was like, Susan, what do I do? She's like, put that you're writing a book. I'm like, writing a book? I'm not writing a book. She's like, yes, you are. You're writing a book. And I was like, okay. In the bio, I was like, I'm writing a book. And as soon as the piece ran, Susan hit me up and was like, listen, get yourself an agent, get your proposal out there right now. And she recommended a great agent who also goes by the name Susan Galome. And I would say between the point of publishing the essay and selling the book was about maybe 2 weeks. Because as soon as I signed with the agent, I got her a proposal within a week, and I was like, "Give me my book deal." And she, of course, was prepared because once again, I listened to Susan, and my Susan agent held it down, and that's how I ended up with this really great book deal. And I'm just finishing up the book right now. It's in the process of being copy edited. So once again, I will just say it one last time. Please listen to Sue. She knows what she's talking about.
Hey, and say that. She says that on all my panels. Well, congratulations. James Ye, I'm thrilled to have you. And James, aside from being a writer, has also been an editor at Vice and Mick, and now he's at The Believer. And so he actually speaks to my classes about how to break in to do short pieces, which, as you can see from Maria, and actually Kenan started with a New York Times piece. And this book, World in Between, started with a Newsday piece, and Tiffany started with the New York Times. And James wrote a beautiful piece I loved about, for Mick, about watching Maneri with his immigrant parents and their reaction, which I thought was hilarious. And now he's working on a novel himself. So James, could you talk a little bit about how does somebody break in? I know you've helped quite a lot of new writers and people with diverse voices break into Vice, and I think it's called Mick or Mike, and now with The Believer. So you mentioned in class that reading the publication really carefully is a good start. Could you talk a little bit about other things that would make it more likely that someone might be able to publish something they're writing?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me, Sue. And thanks everyone else for being on the panel and
Right.
coming to the Zoom. And congratulations also for the book. So yeah, I mean, and as also I'm also a freelance journalist. So like my advice there is always kind of like, in addition to reading the publication, like to, a lot of places have submissions guidelines. So you can look there. I mean, one of the things I think also is that, depending on find peace, like I'm trying to think of a way to say it, but essentially is like, there's a lot of different venues, right? And I think sometimes people can get, especially in their, I know I did when I was a sort of younger writer trying to break in, like I was really set on certain places. And I think if you can kind of look maybe and get over those sort of, I think this feeling of maybe I need to make a certain kind of like rigid debut at a certain X magazine, and instead kind of think, oh, what are the places that I feel empowered by, that I feel like that are exciting to me, that, and when you start thinking of it that way, you end up finding a lot more places that might be open to what you're doing and kind of be a natural fit. And you also meet, right, editors who, even if they maybe don't say yes on the first time, you start to understand like part of like how you build these relationships and see kind of like this kind of ecosystem. And I mean, and Sue's, as Tiffany alludes to, is like really, really good at just like knowing a lot of different venues and a lot of different editors. And so I think a lot of that is also just like community, where you kind of pay attention to what, people who are doing things that are exciting to you, who, are examples or models of what you really want to be doing. And you kind of try to like figure out like, okay, that's a place that might be a good spot for me, and kind of.
How did you decide on the Maneri piece? Like, is Mick, how do you say it, Mike or Mick?
Mike. So
Mike.
it's Mike, like a
Yeah.
microphone.
Okay, so when you're doing Mike, do they, are they do pop culture? So did you try to take something timely going on in your personal life and make it?
Yeah. So I mean, right. This is I guess a hint if you're wanting to write culture pieces for the internet. You find something that's going to be debuting in with a little bit of lead time, as they say. A couple weeks, couple months, if ideally, and you try to get access to the thing, whether it's a book, a movie, a TV show. And then what you do is you try to come up with an angle that maybe no one else can do. And mine so happened to be, my parents are from the South too. They're also Asian. I have this thing where I think if I just find the right piece of art that they might register, it might make sense to them. And then I also was working there, so I had access to the editors. So it was just thinking about it that way, just like what's the easiest kind of path of least resistance, And so if, for instance, you've been in class with Sue, some editor is like, hey, I really like that idea, think about it, like maybe, see if you can pursue that.
Cool, and I'm so excited that I have my editor, my co-author, and my agent, Samantha Wexstein, on the panel. And Samantha not only sold my book, World in Between, Kennan's story, and found us this fantastic editor, Lynn Polvino. She also sold my memoir, Forgiveness Store, and a self-help book coming out called The Book Bible, How to Sell Your Manuscript No Matter What Genre Without Going Broke or Insane. And I've made Sam come to speak to some of my classes, since she does fiction and nonfiction, and she's an expert on all different kinds of kids' books. And Sam, now I was hearing that own voices was a thing, which were people telling their own stories instead of, trying to throw in characters that have, that don't have anything to do with you. But you told me that that's not the way that they use the term anymore. So could you talk to me about that?
Yeah, so I mean, own voices is definitely still a thing, and it's definitely something that editors and agents are still actively looking for, but it's a term that has been commodified by publishers and booksellers, and it was really originally intended to be a guide for audiences so that they could find authentic stories. So recently, this organization called We Need Diverse Books came out and said, you know, we're no longer using the term own voices, but, you know, you can still talk about your identity. And there's definitely a hunger for stories about a range of identities.
And it sounds like from, I know I tell my students now, I think you turned me on to manuscript wish list, where you can find all the agents, and sometimes editors will talk about exactly what kind of books they do. So it sounds like you do a wide range of books. And are you intentionally open for, as Lynn mentioned, for diverse voices, for you know, people we don't normally hear from? And can you talk a little bit about that? Because interestingly, I have a lot of students, for example, I have a lot of students who are gay or trans or from a different country or bilingual or immigrants, and hilariously, they don't write about it and they kind of hide it. And I'm always like, why don't you write about that? Because I think, I always say, write the thing that only you can write. And if other people can write about it, let them. So do you find, is that more interesting to you if somebody has sort of a marginalized voice that we don't hear from so much? Does that interest you more as an agent?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, people should write about what they feel comfortable about, and they should never feel forced to out themselves or reveal themselves in any way that they're not ready to do. But it's been proven time and again that there is an audience for diverse stories, and that, you know, this audience doesn't necessarily reflect the white people who make up most of publishing. And a lot of these stories are really important. And I mean, just like World in Between, I think is going to change so many lives for young readers. And I hope it'll be talked about in schools and libraries across the country. But yeah, I think that it's really important to have a diversity of stories, especially in kids publishing.
And actually there was, it goes the other way too, because I had a student who wanted to do a YA. He was a gay white male, and he was writing a protagonist who was a lesbian Latino, and all the editors and agents said, don't do that. Like they said, why don't you do, because it was fiction, they said, why don't you do a narrator that's you know, sort of like a Nick Carraway looking at the story. But they're implying that at this stage, especially with kids books, that it gets a little too complicated if you're not telling your own story, or if you're trying to be in the head of a marginalized voice that you're not. That's problematic, right?
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to have any type of cultural appropriation or stereotyping. So it's always best to write from an authentic place. And I think like this is particularly important when it comes to race, because if you're, you know, a white person, you really can't speak to the Black experience or the Latinx experience. I mean, it's a little bit different when it comes to LGBTQ stuff. I mean, it's more fluid. But yeah, it's definitely better to write from an authentic place. It's safer for readers, and you're not doing any harm. And I think that that's like the really big concern when it comes to people who are writing in other races and from other points of view, is that they're doing it either not at all or from a place of like sensitivity, and that, you know, it is authentic and won't be harmful to the audience.
Cool. And so now let's get to the nitty gritty, because most of the people that I saw in the Zoom are writers and they want to publish their own pieces and do books. And I always say that 3 pages can change your life, and that the best way to launch, even if you have if your main thing is a book, the best way to launch it is with a short piece that you publish. And I know, Kenan, you didn't think that American editors would be interested. And if I remember correctly, your first piece was in the New York Times Magazine, and then an agent called, and a filmmaker called, and you were doing interviews. So, and you also did pieces for Slate and Salon. And this book, World in Between, interestingly started with like a 800-word piece for Newsday called My Own Coming to America, which was actually in response to Trump's Muslim ban. So was there any advice that you could give about what helped you figure out how to sell these short pieces?
This first piece was definitely beginner's luck. And I remember it took a couple of drafts, and I thought, oh, it's pretty easy, right? So then wanted to shoot for the stars, and I said, why not try New Yorker? And of course, Dave Remnick said no, and he said no. And then I remember you laughed and you said, oh my God, he even emailed you? I said, who the hell is David Remnick? At the time, I didn't know. And the fact that he emailed me back, that was that was amazing. But
And
basically,
not only that, said, I really like this. This is great, but we have Alexander Hemon just wrote on this same topic in the Balkans, and Kennan was depressed and thought this was a really negative experience. And I'm like, that's not a negative experience. That's a
the
really good side.
second piece took about 6 months, 17 drafts. I remember I started in November and it got published in April. And I wanted to write about a bar fight that happened in Queens between different factions. And you kept telling me, is there anything timely in the world? I said, no, it's not timely. It's not going to happen. It's not going to get published. I remember in April of, I forgot what year it was, 2011 or 12. It was the 20th anniversary of the war. And he said, perfect, just write down your lead. And just by writing that one sentence, made the piece published, and it was in the New York Times.
Timely, yeah.
So it goes back to one of the advice that I have is, other than taking classes, book seminars, join writing groups so people can critique your work, you want to research the topic you want to write about, see if it was written before, and also read about the editors that you want to send your piece to see whether they had published anything similar. So you want to write something that no one has written before.
Timely is so important. In fact, Tiffany's piece came out right around the Black Lives Matter protest. So the timeliness of that was amazing. And I remember James' piece came out when Maneri was like winning Academy Awards. So that's really good advice, is that if there's ever anything going on in your own life and then there's something externally
Another piece was in Salon. It was during Memorial Day weekend. It was just the title was Finding a Man Who Saved Our Family. So basically all those different pieces and essays were extrapolated to chapters. So that's what built the book.
And interestingly, coming to the very short op-ed piece in Newsday, my own Coming to America story, it was the minute that Trump had a Muslim ban, a ban for Muslim countries, and that was the lead. And you use that as a lead to tell your own story about coming over here at 12. And that, and interestingly, a student of mine, Joy Peskin, is an editor at FSG, and she read it and said, this is a middle grade memoir. I'm like, what's a middle grade memoir? She's like, call me, I'm going to explain it to you. So the timeliness was amazing. So Rakesh, as an editor, I'm assuming first off that you mostly work with agents, like that authors really can't come to you directly. They go through a literary agent. But I've been told that if somebody's writing a kid's, whether it's kids book or an adult fiction, you have to write the whole thing. Whereas if you're writing nonfiction, you could write a proposal. So as an editor, is that true? Like, will you buy most novels or short story collections based on the entire manuscript, but you consider a proposal? And I know, for example, you did Eva and Eve, a beautiful book by Julie Metz that recently came out, A Search for My Mother's Lost Childhood and What a War Left Behind. So I think that was a proposal, right? So
that's correct.
Yeah, so could you talk about when you know whether you should write the whole book or when you should write a proposal?
So you're right about that distinction, which is in almost all cases when it comes to fiction, you write the full manuscript, because as you can imagine, in fiction, you need to know how the story turns out. You need to see kind of the way everything plays out in the book. And so you need to see the full manuscript. And with short stories, as you're saying, what you hope the writer does is they write a number of stories, or they've had a few stories published, and those plus the new stories become the collection. And so it's submitted all at once. Nonfiction is typically done with a proposal. Now, there are people, memoir is a good example, where sometimes people write the entire memoir because they treat it almost as if it's a novel, in the sense that they want to see how the narrative comes together. And that's always wonderful if you can find a full memoir manuscript that's, accomplished in that way. But yes, most books are, nonfiction books are sold on proposal, and that contains, a short pitch of the book. It contains background on the author, an author bio, a CV, if that's relevant, media opportunities that might be available, or media connections the author might have. An outline, is very, very key to have an outline or chapter breakdown. And then, as I've told you before, I think, Sue, I really go to the sample material, which is, usually an author will write a chapter or two of the book, and that will be the sample material. And for me, that's really, the exciting thing about the proposal. And I might be alone in this, but it's often the first thing I read, actually, because I really want to see how the person writes. I want to see what is on the page. Sue, you're saying, 3 pages can change your life. And that's true. If you see somebody is writing and it's really strong on the page, then that's really compelling. And when it comes to nonfiction, and we're looking at the writing, of course, but we're looking at the premise and we're looking at, the kind of larger implications of what the writer is trying to achieve and what that might mean for the marketplace. It's a story that's untold, that's largely untold, that needs to be told. So those are all considerations that come into play. And they're definitely, you take different, with fiction, we can roll up our sleeves and start editing it immediately because we have a full manuscript. But the exciting thing about nonfiction is we work with people over time to sort of build it over time because we're seeing it written in real time as they do it. So that is the right distinction.
Interestingly, I've seen and written proposals that sell at 20 pages, and then I think Kenan and I for Bosnia List for our memoir did 120 pages.
Mhm.
What do you prefer, or is it just every project is different?
Every project is different. I mean, it's not, the more material, the better. I don't think you necessarily have to write that long a manuscript if you have a sense of what the manuscript is going to shape up like. I wouldn't want to give people the impression that, you have to write 120 pages of something to sell it. But, but if that, then again, if you share so much material and it seems like you can't edit yourself, or that you're not giving us a clear depiction of what the book might be like, then that can cause concern. So I think, working with your agent, that's where your agent really comes into play to give you guidance on how the material should shape up, what should be in the proposal, what the strongest material is, because then that's the material that you're going to have conversations with when you talk to editors about what they're looking for, what the book may shape up to be. So it's an
Now,
ongoing process.
did you write the full manuscripts of both of your novels before you sold them?
Yes.
The full thing?
Yes, that's
Okay.
right. I mean, it's what the distinction it's worth making is that if you sell a novel, then you have an option on a next book. Sometimes the option will be based on a partial manuscript or a proposal as opposed to a full manuscript. So your agent negotiates that for you so that when you do the next book, you have another project ready to go and it's not contingent upon the same details.
Now, interestingly, Lynn, we at first saw World in Between. We thought it was a middle grade memoir, and I didn't even know there was middle grade memoirs, because if you think about it, memoirs for people 8 to 12 years old, that was I was sort of confused by the idea of it. But then you said, why don't we fictionalize it? Why don't we consider it a novel, which we found extremely liberating. But so is that a common thing? Because I know you do when you're doing YA and picture books and middle grade. Are those elastic at times, or would you, and I've also been told that with kids' books, fiction is much easier, is much more common to sell. What do you think?
Well, I think that the main reason for doing it the way we did it is because exactly what you said, it's liberating. You can get, panelists said this already, like you can really get to the emotional core of what the story you're trying to tell if you're not bogged down by every little detail and fact and the way things exactly happened. And so I think that's the main reason you would want to fictionalize a memoir. I did do, when I acquire a book, part the approval to acquire something is I have to show like comparable titles. I have to research other books, and a part of that is kind of predicting how this particular book might sell if I acquire it. And I noticed that a lot of them were fictionalized, and I don't really know why. I mean, most of because of the freedom that you get from fictionalizing, but I'm not really sure. It's an interesting question. I don't know why it shakes out like that. I think it's just, you can play with the dramatic tension more.
Yeah, and there's something that I always tell my students based on what happened with us, which is a lot of people, like Rakesh was mentioning, all of the different elements of a nonfiction proposal. And one of the elements is you have to find similar titles. And a lot of people think it's just boring to do comp titles. And Ken and I spent a lot of time looking for immigrant stories that were adult books that were being switched into kids' books. And we bought and read and loved It Ain't So Awful Falafel. And we used that as a comp title. And we really explained, we love this. Maybe Kenan's story is told through a male perspective and it's not as funny, but it's, but there's similarities. And then the author of that, the editor of that book bought it. So in a way that convinced me the importance of comp titles. Because, and I think that, yeah, so that was exciting. That was so amazing because it never occurred to me that you could find a comp title that it's like, and then meet the editor who published the first book and knew how to do it. So that was very exciting. Anyway, Maria, could you tell us a little bit more about your own process? And in your case, did you also write both of the entire manuscripts before you found an agent and sold them?
Yes, well-ish. Yes, I mean, yes, do it that way. What I did in my very kind of newbie enthusiasm is I had written, I think the reason it worked, but it is a breaking of the rules. So please, again, disclaimer, do not do what I did. I had written several drafts of it as a memoir. And then when I had the flash of like, yeah, no, this needs to be fictionalized, I fictionalized 3 chapters. And I thought, well, I don't know a blessed thing about YA, but I've decided this is going to be YA. And so I looked at the acknowledgements pages of 2 of the biggest YA novels at the time. The one that really made me understand just how wonderful YA could be, which is a book called Speak by Laurie Hulse Anderson, which if you haven't read is just amazing. I looked at who her agent was, and then Twilight was the only other point of reference that I had, and they happened to share an agency, which is Writer's House. And so I was like, well, I will just pitch the head of Writer's House right into the slush pile, like with these 3 chapters. And then, yeah, then they came back and they said, oh yeah, that's great, send the rest. And I was like, the rest. But somehow I pulled a rabbit out of a hat. Do not do it, but I did it. And that was my first agency.
Yeah, interestingly, that's where Susan Gollum is for Tiffany, and that's where I met Samantha. So Writer's House that's a great agency. That's funny.
Yeah.
I actually used to work for Amy Burkauer, who is
my goodness.
Yeah,
so Genevieve is the one who pulled me out of the slush pile.
Yeah, Genevieve is a dear. I love her. She's
my goodness. Every time I see a tweet from her, my heart still does a little flutter because she changed my life.
Yeah, so I know her really well.
There's only 1,000 people in publishing and they all know each other.
Yeah, I
use that as don't ever be a jerk, because if you're a jerk to one, everyone's going to know. So you have to be really, really cool and kind.
Yep. So I dealt with Genevieve, and I was Amy Burkauer's assistant.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, Amy's the one I wrote to because what could possibly go wrong, right? Anyway, so Genevieve saved me from myself, and she rerouted me. And I landed with Ken Wright 6 months before he left to go to Viking. So I got an agent. I was like, okay, well, this is it. My publishing career is on track, right? 6 months later, as we're still kind of massaging the manuscript to get it ready to go out on submission, he's like, yeah, I'm not going to be an agent anymore. And so again, I had to get shopped internally. So anyway, my road has been a little bit bumpier and more circuitous than most, but I made it.
Cool. Somebody told me a great line I like, which is, people think that publishing is a business, but it's really a casino. By the way, that was the president of Random House who told me that. So I keep that in mind. So Tiffany, I remember from class, you started selling pieces right away. And so if you're going to give advice to someone who's never been published, were you, if I remember correctly, were you just writing whole essays and provocative op-ed pieces and sending them to editors? Is that how you started? And then maybe as you became better known, then you could just pitch the idea versus writing the whole piece?
Right, absolutely. As soon as you taught me about timeliness, I utilized that. So every news cycle, if I saw something that I thought I can jump on or add a voice to, a perspective to, I just made sure and I did it. And I wasted no time. And I pitched where I was welcomed, and I, kind of started with spaces that I knew were open to my ideas and willing to let me go the distance in terms of what I wanted to say. One of the first places I ever wrote for was a small web scene called The Frisky. That editor was so fantastic, and she really let me get a lot of my thoughts out there. So as soon as I had a few of those pieces under my belt and I felt more comfortable to go out into the publishing world and kind of tackle bigger publications, that's exactly what I did. And I just used that guidance of timeliness to always put my best foot forward for editors in bigger publishing spaces. And I would say now that I've been kind of doing it for about 10 years, I've gotten to the point where I've built relationships and I can just reach out and say, I have this idea, what do you think about it? And sometimes editors, even the great editor of the publishing at the New York Times, she's helped me with so many ideas, even helps me with my book, because we just have this phenomenal relationship where I can feel open enough that, even sometimes ask for advice. So the key thing for me is really just dedicating yourself to the not only the art form, but thinking of yourself as a journalist and providing editors with something timely that they need, and doing that work just consistently. And in doing so, you just build these really great relationships. And eventually you're just like, hey, you like this idea? And they're like, maybe if you do this to it, and it makes a big difference.
And by the way, you've written a lot about heavy subjects yourself, which is, I remember, racism and gentrification and leaving America. So I always say to my students, you know, sometimes you say write about your most humiliating secret, and like, you know, NYU undergrads write about the time that they got drunk and threw up all over themselves in a taxi cab, and I'm kind of like, go deeper. Like, is there something, you know, so do you intentionally kind of go there, you know, and is it hard for you to write about some of the more complicated, problematic things that have happened?
Well, I'm really fortunate in that I have, you know, I lack a filter. So I would say that really helps a lot in this. But part of my openness now as a writer really came from cultivating that sense of openness within your classroom, because it was such a really intimate experience having people read your writing amongst like a group of 15 or 20, and everybody's giving you feedback, and you kind of get a sense of how the reader is going to feel and so on and so forth. So you open yourself up to giving as much as you can to your reader, because you appreciate that intimacy that I would say you did such a fantastic job of cultivating in that space, where we were able to not only receive critiques, but give critiques and also hear the strong points of our writing. And over again, as I took more of your classes and published more pieces, I realized some of the strongest parts of my writing was actually me. And that recognition was really powerful for me, because now it's like, that's when you realize you have a voice or you have something worthwhile to share or to say. And I think that's like a turning point for me. Like, yeah, I know what I want to write about.
Fantastic. And James, as an editor, do you, and I know you've been at a bunch of different places and it might be different, but do you prefer if somebody pitches you a piece, like if someone wants to write for The Believer, should they write a 5-line pitch about what they want to write about and tell you their background and give a title? Or would you prefer that somebody, if it's a personal essay or an op-ed type piece, or a memoir type piece, write the whole piece and then send that to you?
I mean, I would say for nonfiction, typically editors are fine with pitches, as long as it's you know, a pitch that's long enough to have a kind of a sense of what it is. You know, there's an angle. You talk about, you know, the sort of three questions y'all probably have all heard many people talk about, right? Sort of why this, why now, why you? And you know, one of the things everyone, I think, throughout all the panelists have said, and I think is so true, is the why you is a very important one. You know, it's like, why, what is the piece? As an editor, you know, I'm so excited when I can read a piece that could not have been written by anyone else, you know, and, you know, that I'm willing to kind of like go to bat for that, even if maybe it might be a little bit different than what, you know, we tend to do. You know, I'm sympathetic to that. I think if it's fiction, generally both, like, the same rule applies if it's a book, but if it's a story, you'll never sell a piece of fiction on a pitch, I think, to a magazine. So that one you have to unfortunately finish the thing. Yeah, with I think people, I'm definitely open to pitches. I'm also open if you've already written a thing, you know, you check it out, but please then also describe the thing as if you're pitching it, because if you don't do that, it's a lot of extra work. And it kind of, I don't know, like, it makes it a lot easier to say no. And that's kind of ultimately at the end of the day, you know, the editor, you know, either it's a pitch is more work or it's a gift. And you want to make it more like a gift.
And though The Believer does fiction and nonfiction?
We only do nonfiction.
Nonfiction. So somebody could, so the best, if somebody wants to write for The Believer, the best bet would be read it carefully, and then do a very specific short pitch to you saying, I'd like to write about this, and give the title and tell a little bit about their background.
Yeah, and also like maybe include some places you've been published, if you've won some awards. There's a really charming, I don't know if he's on the line, but one of the students was like, should I include that I got a Guggenheim? And they're like, yeah. So like, right, you know, no need to be modest, no need to play it up, just say it, you know, you got it. But
sometimes if somebody has no clips, then I say to them, well, then write the whole piece, because if an editor's reading a whole piece and really we're talking 3 or 4 or 5 pages and it's brilliant, then they'll just say, wow, I want to publish this, and it won't matter that you don't have clips or that you're an undergrad or something, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Say, and if you have like this interesting kind of unusual background, let's say you're an undergrad or even a high school student, or like were incarcerated, or like or a veteran, like include these elements. You don't need to necessarily go into it like paragraphs and paragraphs. Maybe that's the actual piece, but say that. I think that can give an editor more reason to see how you might stand out, how you have an experience or that may not be getting published or heard as much. And then also the other thing I would say for me and the Believer, but it's all, so I just put in the chat, there's a submissions guide. So it tells what we want, what we're interested in, examples of pieces that we like, what we pay. And then also the editors to write to, because you could have a really great idea for a feature or a really great idea for an interview. Those aren't my purview though. So something I think is very important, and Sue's very good at this. And like you want to ideally send to an editor who can publish what you send them. They don't have to convince someone else or pass it along. They can just pull the trigger themselves. And so that's, I think, something that's really valuable and can save you some grief. And, because if they can't publish it, maybe they like it, it takes a long time, suddenly it's no longer timely. So yeah, just sort of little tips, words to the wise.
Great. And there's the line that I like is the harder I work, the luckier I get. So if you take a little more time to understand what editors want, that's really helpful. And Sam, you've helped a lot of my students in my online book class understand the different genres, because a lot of times someone's like, oh, I'm going to write a kid's book. I have this great idea for a picture book. And then they send me 8,000 words. And I'm like, wait a second, I think a picture book is like 500 words. So if you don't mind, let's talk about, so a picture book is usually for what, kids under 5?
Yeah, it's for like kids who are learning to read, essentially. And then
Those are really short. Isn't those are like 500 words, 600
Yeah, they're
words?
like 500 to 1,000 words usually. It really depends on how much art versus text you're going to have. The art is a huge part of picture books. I was actually just telling one of your former students that, the art should tell like half the story, and you should leave room for the art to not repeat what the text is saying to tell the narrative.
And then middle grade is 8 years old to 13.
Yeah, it's basically like middle school is how I like to think of it. There's a in between is chapter books, between picture books, and there's early readers, chapter books, middle grade, and then YA is high school age usually.
And is there still, they used to have a thing that was new adult, which was like 19, 20, 21. Is that still a thing?
No.
No, I desperately wish that new adult could be a thing, but until there are imprints that know how to do it and sales forces that know how to do it and bookstores that figure out how to sell it, it will never be a thing. So what we call it now is crossover. And so basically like once you get an agent, you have to sort of figure out if you want to try to sell your project as adult or as YA, because it falls in that weird in-between space. And I think it really depends on what kind of story it is. If it's more coming of age, if the character is on the younger side, then that would be YA. If it's more like, an early 20s, then you would try to go adult. But that space is difficult. It's just because no one has really figured it out, like how to reach that audience, I think. And so don't pitch your project as new adult, because that term is kind of poisonous, but you can call it crossover.
But you should figure out, are you doing a, is it fiction? Is it nonfiction? Is it picture book? Is it YA? Is it MG? So you definitely need to learn.
Yeah, you should know your genre, and you should read widely in whatever category that you're doing, especially because, a lot of people will pitch with like classics as their comps, and writing nowadays is so different. And the books that were, sold for kids 20 years ago already are so different than what's being published today. So you really should be up on what's current.
Cool.
Dr. Seuss would never be published today.
we don't
Yeah.
have much more time, so let's do for the final question for the panel. Why don't you slip in advice to all the writers who were kind enough to come today, and also what's exciting that you have coming up. So again, Kenan, congratulations on World in Between, beautiful middle grade novel that just came out today. And I know that you're doing Politics and Prose on August 5th, and you're going to be doing some, if anybody knows of any middle grade schools, you're going to be doing some talks for 8 to 13-year-olds. And what advice, if there's anything else you want to mention, and what advice do you give to people that are starting out and that maybe have difficult experiences that they're ambivalent about writing about?
We have to ask yourself, why do you want to get published, right? Do you want to just put it on a piece of paper and close the notebook or your laptop, or do you want to make change in the world? So again, taking writing classes, taking criticism well. If you write a first draft, you think it's great, you're ready to send it out, you're most likely wrong. Book seminars, meet the editors' agents. I think you do a class on how to write pitches to editors, and James already went over that. So that's huge. I think I mentioned everything before. I spoke one of the teachers who used her Bosnia list for, oops, I got kicked out.
Yeah, we're hearing you.
Oh, I do? Okay, I don't know why I can't see myself. Teacher who taught Bosnia list for high school emailed me, and she said now she teaches middle school, so she likes to use it for her class hopefully next year. So she has to talk to the school board to see whether it's appropriate for her students. So that's exciting.
Cool, very cool. So Rakesh, so I know you did Eva and Eve, Julie Metz's book that came out. Is there anything else that recently came out that we should be looking for? And is there any added advice that you can give to writers who are working on book projects?
So two things I would mention. I actually just published Graham Norton's new novel. So I did Graham's first two novels at Simon & Schuster, just published his new book at HarperCollins. It's called Home Stretch. So he's written 3 novels. I think this is the best one. So that was great. And then this fall, I'm publishing a debut by a writer from Ghana named Bisi Ajapan called The Teller of Secrets. And it's a really fantastic debut book, coming of age, set in Ghana and Nigeria. And I think she's a really distinctive, fresh voice. We have blurbs from Dave Eggers and Masmin Giste and Mona Al-Tahawi and a number of writers. So I'm really excited about her work. And then advice, I would say, although things have been very challenging this past year, I think one of the things that's hopefully helped us to do is to find a sense of what thematically we want to be accomplishing. I think so much of writing comes down to the carving out the time and the mechanics of writing, and those are very, very important. But I think it's really important, whatever you sit down to write, to remember what thematically you wish to be achieving. And actually, yesterday I was running a seminar where I said, write a statement of purpose, even if it's one sentence, and keep that sense in mind every time you sit down to write, because it'll give you the sort of extra energy to go through and to accomplish everything. So again, yeah, the second book was The Teller of Secrets by Bisi Ajapan, Adgjopon. Thanks.
Cool. And Lynn, we're so excited about World in Between, and actually it's also an audio book, which is so cool to hear somebody read it. So do you have anything else that you want to mention coming out? Also, what kind of advice do you give to, there's so many people that are trying to do kids books these days. Any advice?
I see we're running out of time, so I'll just cut straight to the advice. I just want to reiterate what's already been said, I think, a couple of times, which is, write what you know, even if it's fiction, even if it's sci-fi, find that thing in your personal experience that is distinct and interesting about you, and draw from that you're passionate about. And then the second thing that I think is very important, because as an editor, you can sense that when you're reading, you see that passion and that authenticity if it's there, and it makes it a better story. And also, I just think, do your research. Like, as you were talking about, like how I was the editor World in Between, like, do that research, like try and find out who edited the books or the articles that are, in the same vein as yours. Go be targeted in your submissions, at first at least. And I think that is the best way to go about finding the people who are going to connect with your voice and want to amplify.
Cool. And Maria, congratulations on Love in English, which recently came out. So are you still doing events for that? And everybody should buy it. And I think we have a link in the chat. And is there any other advice that you could give that we haven't?
Thank you. I too will skip to advice, and thank you everybody for taking time out of your evening to come to this. This can be a really bruising business. There can be a lot of rejection, and I think you need to have the sensitivity to be a writer, but then also it's tough to take that side of it. So the best advice, and I know this has come from you, Sue, and I've heard it from other successful writers as well, is just keep going. Try the next thing, take the next class, write the next essay, write the next book, even though it's the book of your heart that keeps getting rejected. Just keep going and keep improving and keep meeting people and just don't stop. If you don't stop, eventually it works.
Cool. And Tiffany, we're also excited for your debut memoir, Black American Refugee, to come out, and everybody could look up Tiffany's work and also the great New York Times piece that launched it. And so is there any advice that you want to share and anything else exciting that you want to mention coming up?
Well, I always try to leave on the note saying that I'm open and I'm available for everyone. Feel free to email me if you have any questions or ask anyone questions. Always ask questions, always be open to advice. And if you get constructive criticism, it's the most phenomenal thing you'll ever receive in your life. I think constructive criticism is worth more than $1 million because it can make you 2 million. So that's why, I will reiterate 10 million times, get yourself in a class like Susan's class, learn how to pitch, take all of the advice that you get. And it's ultimately, I feel like there's a section in my book where I talk about surfing, random, but yeah, and writing is just like surfing. Getting a great book published is like surfing because the wave is like the moment. And if you're the surfer and you're getting yourself on the surfboard, you got to know what you're doing when you're riding the wave. So ultimately, get your tools in order, get your writing down, keep writing, work on it every single day. And when the wave comes, just get ready to write it and like do your tricks and show off. So that's pretty much it.
Great. So James, aside from working at The Believer and having that great Maneri piece come out, I know you're working on a novel. So tell us more about what's going on. And also, do you have any great advice?
Yeah, I'll try to be really quick since we're at the end. But I have a story I'm really excited about that I'm publishing with this small magazine called The Drift. They're new. Check them out. They're really cool. I'm really excited about a writer named Ricardo Jaramillo, who is going to make an early emerging writer who's going to be published in The Believer coming up. He's a Paraplus Fellow. Check that out. It's a great opportunity for emerging writers too. And I mean, ultimately, it's like I really like what everyone said, but especially Maria, so Sue, right? This class, you learn how to pitch, you learn all these sort of logistics of like what to say, what to maybe not say, what to play up. But one of the hard things I think about being a writer is hard, right? It's not just financially hard, it's like spiritually hard, and rejection is such a huge thing. I worked in sales like a very long time ago. And, they said like for every yes you get, you have like 7 no's. And I think that's been very true in my experience for being a writer and everything you hear. And, so it really is about persistence. But even I think one of the things that helps you persist, right, is to find a community, to find your people, who you're writing for, why you're writing, who are you trying to connect with, and whether, and that can be, whether it's a workshop, taking classes like these, connecting with some of the writers in the classes, your peers who you love the work of, who are doing things that give you sustenance, and looking at like bookshelves, looking at, what is moving to you, what galvanizes you when you're in the sort of long dark night of the soul, because it happens. It's like a cycle. Actually, it's just like cyclical. It will keep happening if you write. And so you've just got to find these ways, the different tricks, I think, to keep going and to keep pushing forward and not give up, really. So.
Great. And Samantha, I love that you said that this was your first double reviewed book, ours too. So that was exciting.
Yeah.
So do you have anything else upcoming that's exciting, and any final advice you could share?
Well, I had a picture book published a few months ago that I'm really excited about. It's called Zoomate Wanted. It's about two sisters who are very, very different and have to share a room. So that's a book I hope everyone, buy it for your friends with kids. In terms of advice, I feel like there's been a lot of like advice that is amazing that I won't repeat about, doing your research. But in terms of craft, I think one of the biggest things that draws me in like the first 10 pages is when I'm emotionally connecting with your narrator and your main character. And so I think we should be checking in with them at least 1 to 3 times per page. We should always know how they feel about what's happening around them. And you should communicate that through their physicality, how they're breathing, how their heart is pounding, how their palms are sweating. And just always be cognizant of connecting your audience with your character in that way.
Fantastic. And so I have upcoming classes August 2nd. I have a new pitch class. And I'm loving Zoom. I can't believe I'm loving Zoom. I get students from all over the world. And then definitely thanks to Francois Brodsky at Shakespeare and Company, and buy books from independent bookstores where we could do. We're going to be doing events in person soon. I've done great events in person there, and she sets up these amazing Zooms. And my final advice that I'm stealing from somebody who came to one of my panels told me is be a good literary citizen. So instead of just chasing after checks and bylines, there's a karma thing I think that happens. So when you, like the fact that you guys are here and helping our book, I think is so cool. And thank you so much for doing that. So buy books. And if you like a book, by the way, review it on Amazon and Goodreads and barnesandnoble.com, and share it with people and post other reviews. And, don't just be selfish and want to promote your own work, because what I find is that sometimes when you help other people, then the karma comes back to you. And, and I think that, books could do good in the world. And I'll end with I love the line that Kenan said, which was, which I always talk about with my students, about how writing can turn your worst experiences into the most beautiful. Kenan, just to end on a very happy note for World in Between, are you allowed to, will you tell the story of the best thing that happened for you after Bosnia List came out, your best Sarajevan fan?
Yeah, I found my wife.
Tell him what happened.
No, that's it.
That's
Keep
it.
my-
So
keep
he
my
got a lot of
entire
fan
life
mail.
out of-
He got
out
a
of
lot of fan
social media.
mail. He got a lot of fan mail, and he actually, the sweetest notes was from a woman from Sarajevo who didn't have a picture. She just said how much she loved Bosnia List, and he looked her up. She was gorgeous, and after FaceTiming, got on a plane, and now she's in Greenwich Village. So he had this great line, which is, by facing down his past, he found his future.
Correct.
So 3 pages really can change your life, right?
900 words, yeah.
900 words, did it. Anyway, anything else to add, you guys? Thank you so much to these brilliant panelists. So we had Kenan Trebincevic and his fantastic adventure, amazing story with a beautiful ending, World in Between. Rakesh Saital, who's the author of Blue Boy and No One Can Pronounce My Name. My amazing editor, Lynn Palvino. Thank you so much for buying this book. My great agent, Samantha Weckstein. Thank you so much for finding Lynn. Marie Andrew, who has a fantastic new book, 2 books, Secret Side of Empty and Love in English. And Tiffany Drayton, we can't wait for Black American Refugee, and can't wait to, if you come to New York when the pandemic's over, I'm throwing you the book party. And James Ye, thank you so much for helping so many of my students figure out Mike and Vice and The Believer. And thanks, Francois. And thanks everybody for coming. And you can email me if anybody has any questions. I put I put my email in the chat, so you can email me any questions. Thank you, guys. Congratulations, Kenan.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, World.
Happy
Thank you.
birthday.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to the gallery.
I'm going to end the panel. Good night, everyone.
Thank you guys for coming. Great to see everybody.
Thank you.
You.